Good morning, online campus. Pastor Laura here. It is great to be back with you guys. Last week, we started our journey with Jesus through the final days of his life. We found ourselves in the upper room with him and his disciples when Jesus used some of the precious moments that he had left here on earth to get down and to wash his disciples' feet one by one by one. We got to join him as he humbly served. In the Christian calendar, we call this day in Jesus' life when he did this for his disciples, Maundy Thursday. And each year, we as a church family gather to mark this event. We celebrate Holy Communion here in our Melrose campus sanctuary. It's this powerful moment as we join in a very real way this Last Supper that Jesus had with his disciples. We not just remember with our minds that event way back then, but we re-experience it as if we were sitting right there with Jesus. It is a very moving service. It's one of probably the most well-attended events within our life together. If you've never experienced it, I'd invite you to come and to be a part of that on April 14th, either in person here at the Melrose campus, or we'll be streaming it online. If you're coming in person, I would encourage you to come a little early because it can be hard to find a seat. But it wasn't always like that since I was here at Broadway. I remember the very first time I came to our Maundy Thursday service, there were about 50 wonderful and faithful people who were gathered here that night. We had kind of thrown together an order of worship last minute, and I had volunteered to be the person at the door handing it out. But right before we got started, there was a bit of a commotion. There was this big problem that we had just realized. We had gathered there to remember and reenact Jesus' Last Supper, but we had no communion elements. Everyone else thought the other person was getting them. And so there was one person who volunteered. They said, I'll go get the elements. And I stepped up and I volunteered. I was like, I'll wait for them and, have everything else ready so that we can take them in as quickly as we can. And so I was out in the Welcome Center waiting for the communion elements to come. I wasn't, too nervous about it until all of the hymns had been sung and Pastor Rick stood up and began to preach. I knew that he had prepared a shorter sermon for that night. And so our time was ticking away pretty quickly. I kept going to the doors and looking out to see if I could see that person returning with what we needed. But I had kind of got to the point where I was about to walk into the back of the sanctuary and kind of give the signal to Pastor Rick to keep stretching the message out because the elements still weren't here. Just as I kind of moved toward the door to do that, though, the doors to the Welcome Center opened and in came the elements. I grabbed them and I put the bread on the plate and filled up the chalice with the juice. And as I was doing it, I heard Pastor Rick say, "Let us pray together." And so it gave me this opportunity. With every eye closed and every head bowed, I snuck into the back of the sanctuary and processed the elements up to the front, to the altar. And when everyone opened their eyes, it was like, poof. The elements had magically appeared. I don't really remember anything else about that night at that service, but all I do remember is that, it was almost communionless, which seemed absolutely unthinkable to us, that we would leave out that critical element on that special day. However, come to find out, the Gospel of John, it would have been totally fine with this. Unlike the other Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, John, he kind of casually mentions that there was a meal, but that's it. He is radio silent on anything else about it. He doesn't have Jesus taking the bread and saying, "This is my body, take, eat." He doesn't have Jesus then taking the cup and saying, "This is the blood of the new covenant poured out for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins. As often as you drink from it, do this in remembrance of me." No, none of that is in there, which kind of raises a question, doesn't it? Why would John leave out this important event? Why does he skip right over it? Did he think it wasn't important? That's probably doubtful. John is believed to be the last of the 4 gospels that were written. And so perhaps by the time that he was writing down his perspective of the story of Jesus, maybe it was so widely practiced by followers of Jesus and so well known about this Last Supper that he kind of felt like, people already know about this. Maybe he felt like there was no reason to replay yet again such a familiar event. Maybe he assumed that people would just fill in the blanks. Yeah, there was a meal. They knew what happened, right? And so maybe the story was just too familiar, and that's why he leaves out the story of the meal. Or maybe John just was trying to be unique. About 90% of the book of John is unique. It's events and stories and words on the lips of Jesus that are not found anywhere else. And its style is very different as well. It's much more poetic with these extended stories, that stands out in great contrast to kind of the blow by blow, quick moving sequence of events that we find in the other gospels. In fact, if I had to guess, I would say that John was likely a 4 on the Enneagram. I don't know if you're familiar with the Enneagram personality test. It's just one way of understanding like who we are and what motivates us. But if you're familiar with it, then you know that a 4 is known as an individualist. They are honest. They are creative. They are expressive. And they have this desire to stand out. They have this desire to be different. They have this desire to make sure that they are seen as significant. I mean, the man does call himself the beloved, the one that Jesus loved throughout his entire gospel, for goodness sake. And so, for sure, 100%, John never took the Enneagram personality test. But again, if I had to venture a guess, I would say that saying he's a 4 is a pretty safe bet. So, maybe John was skipping over the details of the meal because it was such a familiar story. Or maybe he was just doing what Enneagram 4s do best. He was just trying to be different. But I think there's another better option for him not to detail this Last Supper of Jesus. And I think that it's this: to put the exclamation point on something that all of the other Gospels had missed. Something that Matthew, Mark, and Luke had left out of their accounts, but that is of extreme importance. You see, it's only in the Gospel of John that we are told that after this meal that Jesus got up and washed the feet of his disciples. Can you imagine the loss of not knowing about that powerful moment? Furthermore, it's only in the Gospel of John that we learn this new commandment that Jesus gives them on this night that has become known as Maundy Thursday. Indeed, that's what Maundy means. It comes from the Latin word that means commandment. And so what was this new commandment that John goes out of his way here to include in his gospel to pass on from Jesus to us? Let's hear it again. John 13, verses 34 through 30. A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. Now, this commandment might not sound all that new to us at all. In all the other Gospels, Jesus has already said that the greatest commandment is to love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and that the second is like it, that we are to love our neighbor as ourselves. These commandments, in and of themselves, they weren't novel, they weren't fresh. These are actually commandments that are coming from the Old Testament. Jesus is taking them from Deuteronomy and Leviticus and kind of putting them together to elevate their importance. And so as we hear this commandment, love one another, we might be tempted to just kind of like nod our heads and want to rush right on past it as if this is old news to us. We might be tempted to say like, yeah, we already know this. We've heard this all before. This is not new in the least. Kind of like the new Coke Zero that they've been putting out on the shelves. Are there any other Coke Zero fans out there? To know me is to know that Coke Zero is my favorite beverage. But every couple of years, I will go into a slight panic and maybe a little bit of a depression because news will come out that they are not going to make Coke Zero anymore. And it will disappear from the shelves for just a moment. But here's what happens every time. It will come right back with just a slightly different look and the word new plastered on it. This last time, they simply changed the outer wrapping color from black to red, and they put this little sticker on it saying that it has a better taste. However, as someone who religiously drinks Coke Zero, I can attest to you that there is no change in the taste. There is zero difference. There's nothing new about this Coke Zero except for the outer package. Is that what's happening here in the book of John? Is he just slightly repackaging the same old thing and slapping a new sticker on it? Is he just, using some clever marketing scheme to get us to slow down and take notice and not skim right over this otherwise long-standing commandment? Well, when we do slow down and we do take that closer look, what we discover is that there is something new that Jesus is saying to us. There is something novel and fresh that he doesn't want us to miss. In John 13, in this new commandment, there is a specification, there is an intensification, and there is an implication that we do not want to miss. And so, first of all, in this new commandment, there is a specification. In the other Gospels, Jesus instructs us to love our neighbor, which is actually a very, very broad instruction. Our neighbor is essentially anyone that we come into contact with, not just the people who look like us or talk like us, not just people who are from the same place or believe all the same things, but rather anyone that we encounter all the time, everywhere. That is our neighbor. But let me ask you a question. Who is easier to have warm feelings toward? A person that you love in theory from a distance, or a person you know really well up close? Who's easier to be kind to, a stranger that you just met or someone that you've spent lots of time with experiencing all their flaws and failures, all their quirks and their annoying habits? Who is easier to wish well, an acquaintance that you encounter for a brief moment in the best of circumstances, or someone who you've had to endure all the ups and downs of life with? I'll be honest with you guys. I can go throughout my days and show people all kinds of generous grace and loving kindness. But when I get home, I find that showing that same generous grace and loving kindness is a whole lot more difficult. Research says that this is a pretty normal thing for us, actually. That we can be our most polite to random people, to strangers and acquaintances, but we just kind of relax around the people who are closest to us. Unconsciously, we are more prone to release our anger toward those people that we're close to because we think that the relationship we have with them is strong enough to endure it. The closer we get to someone, the less tolerant we become of their negative qualities. And on top of all of that, the more trust that is established between us, the more apt we become to test that. The more apt we become to push the limits of that relationship. And so loving our neighbor is one level of challenge from Jesus. It is a challenge to be sure because it means everyone. No one is left out. But being patient and kind, not envious, boastful, or prideful, not dishonoring, being self-seeking, or easily angered, not keeping a record of wrongs with the people that we are around all the time, that is a whole nother level of challenge from Jesus. Remember, in this moment, Jesus is not standing around talking to this huge crowd of people. No, he is speaking only to his 11 closest friends. He is looking his disciples in the eyes in this moment as they are gathered around a table all by themselves. He is getting very specific when he says, love one another. He is telling them to love the person on their right and on their left, the person across from them and down the way. He is telling them to love one another within this family that they have become, this family that would soon become known as the church. There is a specification in this new commandment of Jesus. He is zeroing in from this broad commandment of loving our neighbor to call his followers then and right now to love our fellow disciples, to love the people we are in constant, close communion with, to love the people that when you really get down to it are kind of the people that we find loving most difficult. And this new commandment, only recorded here in the Gospel of John, there is this specification. But Jesus, he doesn't stop there. There is also an intensification as well. Elsewhere, Jesus has called us to love our neighbor as what? As we love ourselves. But listen to what Jesus says here as he sets an even higher standard. He says, as I have loved you, so you must love one another. As is a very small but very powerful word in this passage. It means just like. It means in the very same manner. It means to the very same degree. It means corresponding fully. It is calling us to love one another like a carbon copy of how Jesus has loved us. And so how has Jesus loved us? Well, I can tell you it's much more than just having warm feelings toward us. A lot of times that's what we make love out to be, just having these certain feelings toward a person. And when those feelings start to wane, what do we say? We say we have fallen out of love, right? When we get tired or frustrated or disappointed with one another, so often we just take that as our cue to give up and move on, to disconnect from one another. However, the love that Jesus calls us to here is not just some feeling that we are to have toward one another, but rather it is all about a choice to take action for the good of each other. In love, Jesus took the first step toward us when we were distant, making the choice to take on flesh and come and dwell among us. In love, Jesus didn't give up on us when we messed up or we misunderstood him. No, he made the choice to keep showing up with love and compassion and patience and kindness. In love, Jesus gave up his life that others might thrive and come fully alive. He made the choice to humbly serve and to sacrifice himself for us. He has loved us with a loyal love. He has loved us with a committed love, with a genuine, unshakable, immutable love. It is a love that endures and persists, come what may. It is steadfast and rock solid, always seeking to mend any brokenness and always extending forgiveness. It is a love that is not based on our performance, but rather it is a setting of the will. It is a choice to love regardless, even regardless of how the recipient receives it. Jesus, he knew that these disciples sitting around that table who he was looking in the eye, that they were about to go through some very, very difficult times. He knew that they were going to be grieving the loss of his physical presence and that they were going to be having to try to figure out what in the world life looked like now. He knew that it would be all too easy for them to get annoyed. He knew that it would be all too easy for them to point fingers and blame one another because a lot of them were going to mess up pretty big time. He knew that it would be easy for them to disconnect when things got rough, to just give up on one another. And so he gives them this new, specific, intensified commandment to challenge them to make the choice. To make the choice to actively give to one another the very same love that they had already received from him. And then he goes on and he tells them why. He tells them why this matters. This new commandment, it has this powerful implication as well. As Jesus says, by this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. You know, some organizations or groups, they have like a super cool logo that you can slap on the back of your car, wear around on your chest, on a t-shirt. Others have certain clothes that they wear, like red hats or uniforms. Others actually get tattoos on their body with certain symbols or words, all so that without having to explicitly come out and say it, the watching world will be able to just like pick them out in this crowd and know that these people are a part of something that is bigger than themselves. Jesus says that our love for one another is that for us. He says that this is what will imply that we are disciples to the watching world. No logos, no symbols, no special clothing required. Our love for one another is what should make us be standing out and being set apart. The way we treat the people that we are in close community with, warts and all. And the way that we make the choice to actively love one another in the best and the worst of times, these should be the things. These should be the things that cause people to stop and to take notice. These should be the things that make people look at us with wonder and say, there's something different about these people. They look like Jesus. Jesus, he said to his disciples, past and present, that very first Maundy, Thursday, a new command I give you. Love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. I want to invite us to live out this commandment a little bit today. I'm going to guide us in what's known as the prayer of loving kindness. And I'm going to invite you to pray for one another, for the people who are a part of this church family. I'm going to guide you to pray for 4 people specifically. I'm going to guide you to pray for someone that you thank God for in our church family. I'm going to ask you to pray for someone who's going through a hard time in our church family. I'm going to ask you to pray for someone that you're having a hard time loving in our church family. And then last, I'm going to ask you to pray for yourself. Because here's the deal. We can't give away what we don't have. Our ability to love others is directly tied to our ability to receive God's love for ourselves. And so we're going to pray for each of these people, and I'm going to challenge you to pray these words for each of them. To pray, may they be safe, may they be healthy, may they be happy, and may they be at peace. And then I want to challenge you to pray the same prayer for these same 4 people every day this week. That is one way that we can actively love and choose to love the people in our church family. But if as you're praying, you sense Jesus asking you to take action and to choose to show your love in some other way, then do it. Make that phone call, send that text, write that note, mail that card, give a hug, whatever it might look like. But let's pray together. In this moment, I want to invite you to call to mind someone that you thank God for in our church family. And as that person comes to mind now, would you pray this for them? May they be safe. May they be healthy. May they be happy. May they be at peace. Now I'd like to ask you to call to mind someone who is going through a hard time in our church family. As that person or that name comes to mind, would you pray now? May they be safe. May they be healthy. May they be happy. May they be at peace. Now, call to mind someone that you're having a hard time loving in our church family. And if there isn't a particular person in mind, then ask God to prepare you for that moment when that comes. But with that situation in mind, would you pray now? May they be safe. May they be healthy. May they be happy. May they be at peace. And then lastly, I want to invite you to pray for yourself. May I be safe. May I be healthy. May I be happy. May I be at peace. We pray all this in the name of the one who completely loves us. Amen.